Aloha and welcome to the Embodied Healing Self podcast with your host, Jen Mons. Each week, join me for soul-inspired, conscious conversations around embodied healing and awakening to your soul's purpose. Thank you for listening in. Aloha, friends and family, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Embodied Healing Self. So I was inspired to come to you with this week's episode from one of my clients, Katie DeAndrea, who is co-hosting her new podcast, Live Your Truth Now. And she's part of our North Star Collective. She is one of the coaches whom I have the honor and privilege to work with privately side by side, as she is fully stepping into and owning her grace, her wisdom, her truth, her gifts, her soul wisdom. Her first few episodes have been all around core wounds and limiting beliefs, which we have been exploring and discovering in our North Star Collective. And so it's interesting that, sometimes as teachers and healers and coaches, we sometimes take for granted how much we've learned along the way, and we don't even always speak to it because it's just become a part of who we are. That's the embodiment piece of it. And so it's really helpful to go and listen. It was super helpful for me to listen to her share her learnings in her exploration in our North Star Collective on what has really been coming through for her, and then teach it in her own way. It was just a really beautiful reflection, a beautiful gift for me as well. So thank you, Katie and Mike. And it gave me the invitation to dive into a little bit more about the core wounds and limiting beliefs and the stories that show up in our life. Last weekend, I also stepped into a journey for the year in the way of the shaman, which I'll record another podcast on that and my story on getting there and how there were so many divine synchronicities and a lot of resistance for me to fully step into that. But I know that it is part of the energy intuitive certification program that is a part of our Embodied Soul Institute, and learning the ways of the shaman and the soul illumination and soul retrieval. So the reason I say that to tie those two together is because a lot of what we were exploring in the shaman training as well, which I've been doing this work for probably about the last 5 years, but was really getting super clear on the stories and the narratives that we live in and how they show up and shape our beliefs, our experiences, and our lives. And so this is really just another reframe for the work that we're doing in the North Star Collective. And so I'm going to share with you today what some of those beliefs, stories, core wounds are, how they show up, what they mean for us, and how we can begin to shift them in our lives. I've been hearing a lot of conversation and energy around this, and it's also one of the reasons that our Embodied Soul Signature, Awakening the Embodied Healer program, is a prerequisite to the Coaching and Energy Intuitive Certification program. Because what I've witnessed is missing in the coaching industry over the years is the inner work. There are a lot of coaches out there making promises to sell you or to help you become a, quote, 6-figure, 7-figure business owner. But if you haven't done the work to know your self-worth, it's not going to happen. You can have all the tools you want. You can become a certified coach. You can become a certified healer. You can have your own experience. But if you don't know your worth and your ability to attract and manifest and live in the dream that you're worthy of, then one of two things can happen. Either it doesn't happen for you, or you're going to grind and hustle and do it the hard way, because you'll be coming from your wounded survivor self rather than the place of trust and flow. So let's just dive right into it, because I know this is a topic that is probably in the hearts of many. It is something that we're all living with. It's part of our human condition, which is really just getting clear and navigating the stories that have been a part of our life, and just really understanding, like, where did this story, I call it a story because although there is some truth to it, remember that we create the perception of what the reality was at that time, and we create a story about ourselves in our experiences. So this isn't to discount any trauma, any experiences that have been a part of your life, my life, all of our lives. There's certainly a need to address when we're in a place of trauma, address these issues through possibly some type of therapy. But most of us that I'm really speaking to on this platform, most of us are in a place of just noticing that we're feeling stuck or frustrated, or things just aren't quite showing up the way that we want them to. We've done a little bit of work. Maybe we've gone to talk therapy. Maybe we've shifted a few things in our life, but there's maybe just one or two things that just keep showing up and validating these limiting beliefs or fears or blocks, and we just don't understand why. So that is who I'm speaking to today. So I want to start by just sharing that oftentimes what happens is we create some sort of belief about ourselves from an experience from a younger age. This might have been coming from one of our parents or some other trusted adult or person in our life, or maybe even just our own experience alone. And it doesn't mean that there's somebody to blame or to make wrong, even when somebody has done something that we don't approve of or is not okay. It doesn't mean that we are in the practice of projecting blame or finding somebody else to be wrong in this situation. It's really more about just understanding ourselves and using one of the tools that I love that we use to communicate with other people, the practice of NVC, nonviolent communication, 4-step process. I teach in our collective that we use those tools to really understand what our needs are, what needs weren't met. So in this case, we're talking about what story or belief that we created to either keep ourselves safe or to make ourselves feel loved or to make ourselves feel worthy in that moment. So I'm going to share with you first the 5 most common self-limiting beliefs, subconscious, we're not even consciously aware of them, that I have noticed in my 11 years of coaching. And so the first one I'm going to speak to, which is mine, and one that I see often, I tend to attract many women who are subconsciously living in the pattern of this belief because it's the one that I'm working through, is the one around worthiness. And when I say working through, I just mean that it's a practice. There's no magic pill that all of a sudden, like, okay, we do the work and then it's totally gone. Like, we create a new belief and it's completely shifted. What happens over time is that you embody your new belief, and the energetic attachment, the imprinting is just no longer there. It doesn't have any power over you. The emotion, the reaction, the triggers really don't happen anymore over time. So the first one around worthiness can show up like, I'm only worthy then. So it's putting a condition on it. I'm only worthy when I make this amount of money. I'm only worthy when I look a certain way. I'm only worthy when, let's just go to the healer and the coach, when I help people, when they have results. I'm only worthy as a mother when my children do well in school or in sports or whatever it is that they're doing. Or I'm only worthy when I'm smart. And how it can show up in an unhealthy way is the need to prove ourselves, the need to be validated externally by other people, the need to be liked, let's just say on social media. Like, if you're constantly checking your likes on social media, then this might be a way that this subconsciously shows up for you, where your worth is in the validation of the human experience or the human condition in some way. Maybe it's even in your ability to help people as a therapist, a doctor, a healer, a coach, a mother, a father. So really just getting clear on knowing and owning Do you believe and know your worthiness without condition? Or do you sometimes feel that feeling of unworthiness? And so one of the practices that we teach is to use somatic inquiry. I hear the question, how does a person get out of the thought once they become aware of the limiting belief? How do we even know how to reframe this? And my answer to that is to get out of the mind, to simplify the experience, to recognize that thoughts and emotions are energy in motion, and to go into the body, to the body wisdom, because the body doesn't lie. So we'll get into that after we cover these 5 beliefs. But in case you're thinking already, questioning, as you might be, if this is your limiting belief that shows up around worthiness, questioning whether or not this is even valid for you, I just wanted to kind of throw that little nugget of wisdom in there. So the second one is the belief that we're not lovable, or I'm only lovable when. I'm only lovable, again, a lot like worthiness. When I look a certain way, make money, marry that guy, marry that girl, my kids are doing awesome, I have a nice house, a nice car, and on all the things. And just getting really clear on how this might show up in your life. If you're in that limiting belief, that survivor strategy that can show up, oftentimes this might show up as the overgiver. The overgiver, the person who struggles to allow themselves to be loved. Because oftentimes the thing that we're seeking, that self-limiting belief, is the thing that we're doing. So it's like the love languages, right? So we often love people in the way that we want to be loved. So this shows up if we have that subconscious self-limiting belief that we're only lovable when, oftentimes this can show up as over nurturing other people and expressing deep love for other people in a way that you wish you felt love. When underneath all of that, the only thing standing in the way between you receiving love is knowing that you are lovable enough to receive it in the first place, with or without external validation of the way that somebody is showing up in your life to give you love. In other words, not making it about you so much that because the person may not see or be aware of how you need to be loved doesn't mean that they don't love you. It's just an opportunity for you to stand in your power, in your belief that you're lovable, to make the request. Make the request of that person. I'm noticing this. Would you be willing to do this? This is how I feel loved. If you know that this is your belief. So again, remembering that sometimes it shows up conditionally, especially if we have really, really good ego patterns and a really great survivor strategies. We like to put conditions on it because then we think we're in control, and it's a way that we keep ourselves safe. Like I know I'm lovable. I know I'm lovable, but only when I look really pretty. Only when my body looks like that. Only when I say something brilliant, right? So noticing if that shows up for you, like we know that we're worthy and lovable, but maybe there's that part where we only know it when it's conditional. So the third one is a need for safety. So really just trusting and knowing that we're safe. And this really comes down to trust. So allowing yourself to show up in the world in a way where you can really believe and trust. You can trust in that you are supported in something greater than you, in God, in grace, in source, divine energy, the collective. And you know that you are safe and protected and loved, even not just on physical terms, but in something greater than yourself. Or you know that you can trust other people. And maybe this is about you trusting yourself to create healthy discernment in relationships with other people. So this can show up in so many ways. It can show up in the words. Notice how the words can even shift, right? For some of us, it might be that it is safe to trust. For some of us, it's the need to feel safe, or I only feel safe when, or you can't trust anybody. You can't trust anybody in the world. Nobody's worthy of my trust. Or are you a person who gives trust away too easily because you don't trust yourself? So just kind of noticing like the different ways that this can show up. And if this is one for you, the way that it can show up in the survivor strategy or an unhealthy way is total lack of trust for people, always thinking people are out to get you, never trusting or believing in other people, thinking you have to do it all on your own, not trusting in collaboration, not allowing yourself to be supported because there's a belief that nobody can do it as good as you. Like you can't put that faith or trust in other people. And then take a step back for a moment in the bigger picture and just notice all of the events in history throughout your personal life that have validated your belief that systems can't be trusted, the healthcare system, maybe it's the government, maybe it's the world, right? Like, so in my personal life, there was 9/11, which was a personal terrorist attack. It really kind of broke my belief that all humans were good, which I feel fortunate to be born into that privilege, but it was really, it was just earth-shattering for me. I knew many people who worked in the trade towers. My dad was in the Pentagon that day. And then think of the stock market crashing and the housing market crashing and now this pandemic. And just notice all of the beliefs and the fears that are coming up in people through 2020. With Black Lives Matter, can we trust the system that creates protection for us in the police force? Can we trust the government? Can we trust the healthcare system to create a vaccine? Is that even the answer? Can we trust our bodies, ourselves, to be resilient to this virus? And just notice like what came up for you last year, because people were really in a place of trust or fear. So how did that show up for you when you were really invited to lean into a breakdown in beliefs? Because if 2020 was really difficult for you, this might be a limiting belief. There might be a wound underneath that is showing up for you, just inviting you to lean in. Because if we resist it, then we just keep noticing that it shows up in different relationships in our life. So the fourth one is believing in, it's a little bit like trust, but it's more like hope versus hopelessness. I don't see this one often, and I want to just share that I believe it's because I do feel honor and acknowledge that I believe I've been born into a life of privilege. I haven't known poverty. I haven't known scarcity. And not that I grew up with a lot. I mean, my dad was in the military. We had enough to feel safe, but it wasn't abundance. But just kind of, noticing that I have witnessed. However, I want to just say that when I worked corporate through Procter & Gamble, there was just somebody who totally just changed my life. And just witnessing all of the things that he had to come through in his life to get to where he was. And to be at almost the same place that I was as a manager for a huge corporation in America. But the obstacles that he had to overcome. So this isn't saying and validating that if you're born into a certain life, that that's just the way it is. This is actually saying the opposite, but this is the belief that I'm speaking to. If I'm born into a family of poverty, that's me. If I'm born into a family of genetics with cancer and mental health, well, that's just going to be me. And I personally do not adopt that belief. In fact, it gives me the invitation to really feel empowered about what I want to choose. And it's been a lot of my life work is really just, noticing health conditions in my family, which is why I started health coaching and just deciding for myself what I wanted my truth to be around that. And then also giving up the attachment to it and surrendering it to God, which goes back to the trust. Like, how often do you trust? So just noticing if you ever have those thought patterns. And what I really notice is there's a huge, this is just my perception, my experience, so I'm just going to, put myself into this equation as a coach over the past 12 years and through all my life experiences, is that I'm noticing that the younger generation, they don't fall into this. They believe very much more into possibility and abundance. Whereas the older generations, I think because of what they've experienced or maybe where they are in their life, and I would consider myself to be like on the leading edge of the younger. I mean, I'm 43, but also just in my mindset, believing in the limitless possibilities. I just noticed that the older generation sometimes might more, not everybody. I certainly have my circle of wise elders in my community whom I love to hang out with who would totally break this belief. But I'm saying in general that it's as we maybe mature in age, or maybe because of our generation or what we were born into, I noticed that sometimes it might be easier to believe something is true. And if you think about it from the perspective of a woman, I mean, women's rights have come so far in the past 60 years. Well, of course my grandmother had different beliefs than I do around what I can do as a woman. And even myself compared to somebody in their 20s, because for me, there were still a lot of things women couldn't do. I still got paid less when I was a corporate engineer. I still was told I couldn't fly jets. In the 90s, I wrote a paper on it in high school and thought I wanted to be one of the first female fighter pilot because I wanted to do it from a place of, you're telling me I can't and I want to, which again was my survivor strategy. It was from a place of proving myself real. So going back to that worthiness piece. So just noticing, like I just shared a few stories with you so quickly on how all of the beliefs have shown up in my life. I know that there's a dominant one, but then there is, kind of that perspective and just noticing that we live in the flow of all of them. And then lastly, one of the ones that I think is maybe just a little bit more recent over the past 10 years with the introduction of social media and just the ability for us to really take up space in a bigger platform through all of the social media outlets, is just the one around knowing or believing whether or not you're seen, heard, or supported. And so how this can show up is that belief from, maybe when you were a child not being seen, either when you needed support, maybe you didn't feel well, maybe your mother had 8 kids and you were the one that when you were sick, you didn't get attention because maybe there was another child who needed more attention. Or maybe it's feeling misunderstood, not seen in your gifts, your talents, your needs, either one. So this one can show up a lot too, and it can show up around that feeling of like frustration of just not being seen or heard, or sometimes it can feel like rejection. Like you're making the story about yourself being rejected, but maybe the other person clearly just doesn't see you or hear you because people can only see you or hear you from where they are. But we make it personal. We turn that story into this person's rejecting me because they don't understand me, because they don't know what I need, or we turn it into they don't love me or I'm not worthy. But just noticing sort of that sensation or feeling of not being seen, heard, or supported. And so those are really the 5. So just to recap, the first one, not being worthy or only worthy when. The second one being around I'm not lovable or I'm only lovable when. The third one around a need for safety versus trust, like it's safe to trust or not safe to trust. This can be people in your lives or your body or a system. And then the fourth one is around hope versus hopelessness. Like, do you believe in limitless possibility, or do you believe that basically your karma and your epigenetics wrote your life story for you, or do you believe that you can rewrite that subconscious imprinting? And that's a really interesting one when you get into soul work, soul agreements and soul contracts. And just know that nothing from where I come from, at least what I believe, is that we have an agreement to come into this life, the things that we're willing to work on, but we still get to choose. And noticing how easily we give our power away if we believe that we don't get to choose. And so we just settle into what's comfortable. And then the fifth one around not being seen and not being heard. So what do we do when we know these beliefs? That's a good question. The first thing we have to do is become aware of it. So I have provided you with the 5 most common that I have witnessed. This is just from, again, my own personal experience. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. As a coach, this is what I have noticed in my own personal life. And the second and most important step is to release. It's kind of an all-inclusive step, but it's to, when we first become aware of it, we then choose. We choose whether or not we want to accept it. And by acceptance, I don't mean approve. It doesn't mean that we say that we're okay with it. We don't have to be okay with the way that someone showed up. If we felt hurt or sad, we don't have to be okay with the things that people do that are not right. I mean, really hurting people. We don't have to be okay with rape or murder or any of those extreme things of the human condition. That's not what we're saying if we say acceptance. But we accept that the belief that was created from that experience was a truth for us. And we do this from a place of non-judgment. Just a place of presence. And this is the one where we get invited to go a little deeper. You hear people say you have to feel it to heal it. So it's not about just being like, okay, I noticed that I don't feel worthy, but asking yourself, like, where did this belief come from? How has this been showing up in your life? Who were the people in those experiences when you first noticed you started to feel this way? And how has this continued to show up in your life over and over again? For me, the feeling of unworthiness, which resulted from an incident when I was about 7 years old, which I've talked about before on a couple different podcasts. I shared on Own Your Intuitive with Tamara Arnold. And it's really just about noticing it, not necessarily with even the attachment to make anybody wrong, but just noticing it, feeling it, allowing yourself to be present with how that truth came to be. And often what we notice is we then create survivor strategies. And then when we get further into life, we realize that the one thing that we're here to teach or become is the one thing that we didn't have. And then when we get even deeper, we realize that, oh, that core wound, that limiting belief is actually our gift. Because we didn't have a father who was present and loved us, we become a loving father. Because we didn't feel safe in our body because of health crisis or health conditions, we chose to take aligned action to become empowered in our health and well-being. So just really noticing all of the energy around that, but you have to give yourself permission to feel it. This isn't about avoiding or resisting the painful story. This is about actually leaning into it. Because the pain is an emotion associated with the experience, which again is energy and motion. And the invitation is to go into the body, use somatic inquiry, use somatic breath work, go into the body and allow yourself to really get clear on what was happening. What is the belief around it? Who was there and how did it make me feel? What did I need that I wasn't given in that moment? What survivor strategies did I create to protect myself in this story? Because again, those survivor strategies, they can be super awesome. The person who doesn't believe they're worthy can become the overachiever and have massive success financially and marriage, like the whole thing. But there's still a void. There's still an emptiness inside. And so where does your worthiness lie? How does it feel like in your body? And I'm talking about shifting from believing to knowing, like deeply rooted knowing and owning your self-worth. There is no need for external validation. Knowing you're loved, knowing you are safe, knowing that you are limitless, knowing that you are seen and heard and loved. If you know all of those, that is like pure bliss and freedom. And I don't think anybody knows all of these things all the time. We just get to continue to practice, but we get to witness ourselves and how we show up in those relationships and experiences. Because if this is a self-limiting belief that's been showing up, then it's just inviting us in different ways in different relationships. Once we think we've mastered it, it'll show up in another relationship. Oh, you think you're worthy in marriage? You got that one down? Okay, well, let's step over here and explore your relationship with your parents or your siblings or your work, your job, or as a mother. If that is your core wound or limiting belief, it might just continue to show up in layers in different areas of your life. But just know that if you're willing to go in it, the energy behind it is just going to dissipate. It will no longer have power over you because you get to choose. You notice it and witness it, and it feels so empowering and freeing because you're like, oh, look, I notice that, oh, maybe you have a name for yourself in that. Like, oh, little Jenny doesn't feel worthy again. And so she's hustling in her business because she thinks she has to do something to get people to like her and be worthy or something, right? Like, that's how it can show up for entrepreneurs. Which, by the way, if you have any of these limiting beliefs and you're on the road to being an entrepreneur, like, bless your heart, because we are confronted with these all of the time. And that just shows your resiliency and courage to actually lean in and do the work. And then just really knowing and just trusting that all of these are perceptions. So the first thing we do is we become aware of it. The second thing we do is that we have acceptance around it, just acceptance without judgment. And then we begin to shift it, but to shift it, we feel into it. The third step, feel it. Somatic inquiry, go into the body, shift it. If you feel you're not seen or heard, maybe shifting it for you is allowing yourself to be seen or heard in the experience that was first created, this belief. Allowing yourself to make the request to be supported or loved if you believe that you're not. Allowing yourself to live in the flow rather than the hustle if you're someone who struggles with knowing your worthiness around yourself as a being, not just a doing. A human being, not just a doing. And then the fourth step is to create your new belief. Choose. And say it to yourself. There's a vibration to every mantra, every belief that we say that we stand in. There's vibration to the words, there's vibration to the emotion. So really just asking yourself, like, what is the vibration, the truth that I want to have? If you can create a belief that doesn't serve you, you can create a belief that does. That's where the hopeful and hopelessness one comes up, right? Like, which one will you choose? And then release attachment. If there was a fifth step, it would be just to release attachment and just allow yourself to experience all of it. So I hope that I've provided you with some insight today. As I've said, this has been our topic for the month in February for the North Star Collective. We will be offering a second chance to join us in June. If you missed an opportunity to join us in January, and I know that many of you did, it wasn't the right time, we have decided to offer the North Star Collective again, which is the prerequisite for our coaching certification and energy intuitive program at the Embodied Soul Institute. We have decided we keep this the integrity of the group and the support is very important. So once we begin, there is no invitation to join again because we build really strong connections in our circle. So we have decided, because of all of you that have reached out and weren't able to join us at the beginning, because it's been an annual program for a few years, that we have decided we will offer it again in June. So stay tuned for that. Another invitation to join us for the Intuitive Nourishment Spring Detox in March. So if you go to jenmons.com/courses, search Intuitive Nourishment. You can join, you can take part in this program anytime you want, all year long. However, there is only one time during the year where we're doing it as a group. We're doing it with the North Star Collective, and this is your chance to join in on the fun, because it's definitely more fun to have support and just to see and witness other people and know that you're not alone in the experience. So thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a fantastic week, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Aloha. friends, and thank you so much for joining me today and being a part of this community. I know there are many other podcasts that you could be tuning into, and I am deeply honored that you chose to listen in and be present with me today. I love and cherish and appreciate you, and I want to invite you to join our tribe and Facebook group under jenmons.com/connect. I would also love to gift you your guide to discovering and overcoming the self-limiting beliefs standing in the way of you living in optimal health, more energy, fulfillment, and self-confidence to create an embodied, healthy, whole you. You can find this at jenmons.com/tribe. I also have one small request to help spread the love. In order for this podcast to show up in the feed of social media platforms of other like-minded people, we need reviews. So please head on over to jenmons.com/podcast to leave a review. You will also find other inspiring episodes on that page. So I personally read these reviews weekly and would love to give you a shout out and share your kind words with our listeners. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as Jen Mons or The Holistic Coach with the W Holistic and Jen Mons, JenMons.com. Thank you so much and have an amazing day. Aloha.